The world looks a little brighter for 23-year-old Wendy Camp, since she's getting to see her 4-year-old son for the first time in months. She's been locked in a custody battle with her ex-husband, Chad No.
Chad made arrangements for Beverly No, Chad's mother, to drive to Oklahoma City, pick Wendy up, and bring her to Shamrock, Oklahoma, where Chad was living at the time, to visit with Jonathan, their 4-year-old son.
Wendy was super excited to go, and her daughter, she's 6 years old, asked to go, and she was permitted to go. Wendy's current husband did not feel comfortable with Wendy going alone, so he had asked his sister, Lisa, to go with them. Wendy reluctantly agreed. You know, she really wanted to just go by herself with Cynthia, her daughter.
They got to Shamrock at about 1:40 p.m. on that date. The first thing they did was stop at a convenience store there so that Wendy could call her husband, Leon, let him know that they'd made it there. From there, Beverly took them to Chad's house. By all accounts, the visitation went well. Beverly showed back up at the house at around 4:30 to pick Wendy and Cynthia and Lisa up to take them home. They went to the same convenience store, and again, Wendy called Leon to say, "We're headed back home." And that call was about 4:40, 4:45 p.m.
Leon was very, very concerned when they had not made it home by 8 o'clock.
Leon fears something is wrong. And when he talks to Beverly, Wendy's former mother-in-law, that fear deepens. Beverly, who'd driven them to the visit, dropped them off at a shopping mall 45 minutes outside Oklahoma City, instead of driving them back home. The family waits by the phone, fearing the worst, as the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, the OSBI, starts searching for Wendy, little Cynthia, and Lisa.
All of the people who had been working at the store on that date were interviewed. People in businesses in the area, everybody was talked to, and nobody reported seeing anybody like that. Beverly said that when she picked the girls up, her mother, Ida Pruitt, was also with her. They hadn't got a block, and Wendy was just complaining about everything. So Ida told Beverly, "Why don't you just take me home?" Beverly dropped Ida off and then continued on to Chandler, Oklahoma.
When she reaches the Walmart in Chandler, she said she had become very tired of listening to them. So she just stopped and dropped them off. Beverly was very cooperative with us, answering all the questions. Everything she was telling me was very feasible.
Agents interview Wendy's husband, Leon, and clear him. That's not the case with Chad No, Wendy's ex. Red flags pop up right away. And they're connected to Wendy's illness.
When Jonathan, my grandson, was 3 weeks old, that's when she developed the multiple sclerosis. Wendy could not walk or anything.
When Wendy was in the coma, we found out that Chad had filed for a divorce and for custody of Jonathan.
Chad No was interviewed numerous times. Chad's story matches up with Leon's story and with a lot of what Beverly said. Chad was never ruled completely out, but Chad No did not become the focus of this investigation.
All the interviews and searches lead nowhere. A year and a half after the disappearance, the TV show Unsolved Mysteries features the case.
They came out and did the interview, and we felt that that could help solve the case.
Something about the program stands out to Wendy's sister. In an interview, Ida Pruitt, Beverly No's mother, strongly denies she or Chad No had anything to do with the disappearance.
Why would Ida get so upset and claim on the Unsolved Mysteries segment that my sister was griping and a bitching about the past. Her remarks do not make sense. I knew that the family was involved.
Suspicions remain, but leads dry up, and the case of Cynthia, Wendy, and Lisa goes colder than a winter freeze in Oklahoma. The case languishes for years, but a suspicious fire might revive it. Police charge Beverly No and Ida Pruitt with arson.
Beverly and Ida set Beverly's house on fire, and they were arrested.
They did it for insurance money. It just shows the corruption in their soul.
Beverly and Ida do 6 months and are released. Then, 4 years later, Ida Pruitt dies. It takes 2 years when an unnamed relative calls in with a lead.
This person's story was that the bodies were buried under a cement slab at a home where Grover Pruitt used to live. Grover Pruitt is Ida Pruitt's son and Beverly No's brother. The tip was vetted out, but no bodies were found. Still, this did jumpstart the investigation again on Grover Pruitt.
We interviewed Grover at his house.
Grover started telling him about this other property he owned back then.
Grover had sold 5 of those acres to his mother, Ida. She had asked him to dig her a hole to put a septic tank in. Shortly after that, Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia went missing.
Excavation on the hole begins, and it's a slow and careful process.
As we got further down, we began to find layers of trash.
And then we saw a little sneaker. There were what appeared to be 2 adult skeleton remains and then a smaller child's skeleton remains.
Investigators have finally found the bodies of Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa.
An autopsy was performed. Wendy Camp had sustained gunshot wounds and sharp force trauma, likely a knife. Lisa Kreger had multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, and Cynthia by homicide by undetermined means.
The OSBI special agents turned to the person who helped them find the bodies, Beverly No's brother, Grover Pruitt.
We asked him if he would wear a wire and go talk to his sister about Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia, and Grover agreed reluctantly. Grover told Beverly that OSBI wanted his .357, and Beverly said, "I don't know why they do that. We threw all the guns in the hole."
With the discovery of the bodies and everything that we learned with Beverly's statement on the recording about guns, we decided it was time to arrest Beverly. Beverly was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but she never admitted to any of this. It could have been Beverly or Ida, either one, but Ida had died. So Beverly ultimately pled guilty to 3 counts of accessory to murder because she claimed that Ida had done it. Beverly No was given 15 years in prison for this.
Then, less than 5 years later, the family faces one final injustice.
Beverly's back out in society. It's crazy.
I feel that my family members got no justice whatsoever simply because of the fact Beverly is out of jail after 4.5 years. What's the justice? Where was the justice? And to this day, 30 years later, Jonathan is still living with Beverly.
On a November afternoon, a bank of clouds crowds Seattle's skyline. And a cold wind freshens off Puget Sound, bringing with it the first edge of winter. In the early afternoon, an employee from a local TV and repair service walks outside to dump some trash.
He said that he noticed in the trash box that he'd seen a foot. And I think, as I remember, he thought it was a doll for a minute until he did a double take and said, no, that's a real person there. And of course, he immediately called the police.
Sergeant Joe Sanford and Dan Engel head over to the alley behind Magnolia TV.
She was in the large box, and then there were other boxes, smaller boxes, placed on top as if to cover the body.
Forensics removes the body from the garbage, and the mystery of a young girl's death begins to unravel.
There appeared to be semen on the inside of one of her upper legs, so there was certainly sexual activity, and in all likelihood, it was in fact a sexual assault.
Semen samples are collected and tagged as evidence. Next to the box is a white plastic bag, and inside it an ID. The corpse's name is Kristen Sumstad.
I won't say she's a runaway, she just didn't stay at home every night. She had been a reported runaway several times, but I think so many times that the family quit reporting her as a runaway.
The last time Kristen's family remembers seeing her is 2 days earlier, on her way to school. Detectives begin picking their way through the dead girl's friends, looking for a young man who might also be a killer.
I always felt that it was more than likely somebody that she knew and in fact ran with.
Detectives can place no one with Kristen on the night she was killed. The only person seen in the area, a 14-year-old boy and family friend of the Sumstads named John Athen.
He had been seen pushing a cart around the neighborhood, a hand truck with a large box on it. And I sent a detective out to talk to him.
He's interviewed, he said yes, in fact, he was there, that he had gone out and stolen some firewood, and he was wheeling it to his house.
Athen's story sounds odd to police. When they follow up with the boy's family, however, the story checks out. Athen's presence in the case is typed up and filed away, along with dozens of other potential leads, all of them going nowhere. Joe Sanford retires, and the Sumstad case takes its spot in the cold files. In 2002, the Seattle PD blows the dust off some of its oldest homicide files. Veteran detectives Dick Gagnon and Greg Mikesell worked full-time on more than 300 unsolved murders. Their top priority, female victims.
Female victims of homicide are oftentimes sexually assaulted. That is more likely to yield DNA evidence. And with DNA technology advancing rapidly, we felt that would be a good place to start.
65 cases make the cut, among them Kristen Sumstad's murder. Detective Mikesell pulls evidence on the case and sends a semen sample to the Seattle Crime Lab, and Beverly Himmick, a forensic scientist and DNA specialist. Using STR DNA typing, Himmick extracts a complete genetic profile.
I got a great profile on this case. I had a single unknown male individual, and at that point, we really had no one to compare this profile to.
The profile is entered into state and national DNA databases, with no luck. Detective Mikesell and Gagnon return to the case file and start at the beginning, re-interviewing each person listed in reports.
And so by talking to people, the name John Athens kept coming up. And John had been looked at by the detectives early in the investigation. And we talk to someone else, and they say, well, yeah, everybody knows that John Athen did it. And it seemed that everybody knew it but us.
In 1982, Athen was 14 years old. In 2002, he is 34 and lives 2,800 miles away in New Jersey.
That was the challenge we had here, was how do we obtain a DNA sample from John Athen?
They share their frustration with fellow detective Linda Diaz.
She says, well, what if we send him a letter? I said, Linda, I said, I'd love to send him a letter, but what do I send him a letter saying? I'm a Seattle police detective, I want your samples, lick this and send it back to me? She said, well, let me work on that. Let me get back to you.
I put weeks of thought into it, thinking what would entice someone to send me a letter back. And then I thought, well, he had traffic tickets. And I came up with the class action lawsuit idea.
The lawsuit idea is simple. A letter from a fictitious law firm offering refunds for people who may have overpaid the city of Seattle for traffic violations. If Athen responds to the offer, he will have to moisten the return envelope before posting it, perhaps leaving his DNA in saliva on the envelope's seal. The magic of this ruse may be in the details. A few facts like John Athen's actual ticket history make the letter credible. So off it goes to John Athen in New Jersey. A few weeks later, Dick Gagnon gets the call.
Phone rings. It's Linda. Dick, the letter's here. I mean, she sounded like she just won the lottery.
Athen had replied to the phony offer, licking the envelope provided, and perhaps sealing his fate. In 2002, Dr. Beverly Himmick developed a DNA profile from semen left on Kristen Sumstad's body. For 10 months, that profile remained unidentified. Then, in March of 2003, the envelope John Athen returned lands on Himmick's desk.
Every single part of the profile was matching, and so I knew that I had the person who donated that semen was the same person who licked that envelope.
She says, Dick, I got good news for you. I can't tell you who licked the envelope, but I can tell you one thing. Whoever licked the envelope was also the donor of that semen 22 years ago.
3 weeks later, Seattle detectives catch a flight to the East Coast, where they plan to get up close and personal with John Athen. On a May afternoon, cold case detectives pay John Athen a visit at his job site. He is working a backhoe on a construction project in Cliffside Park, New Jersey. Investigators approach the suspect with care. Detectives introduce themselves and ask Athen to join them in the car. Once inside, the questioning begins. John Athen asks for an attorney, but it's too late. He has already made a first and perhaps fatal misstep. Cold case detectives charge Athen with the murder of Kristen Sumstad and return him to Washington to await trial. In the months preceding the murder trial, a legal battle is joined over the ruse mailing used to obtain a sample of John Athen's DNA. Defense attorneys urge the judge to suppress the evidence or dismiss the case because police obtained Athen's private property by posing as lawyers.
Cops frequently will, sell, dope to somebody on the street and then immediately arrest that person and recover the dope. Those cases don't get dismissed, and they shouldn't be dismissed, and we felt like the same logic would obtain in this case.
The judge listens to arguments and rules in favor of the prosecution, refusing to suppress the evidence and upholding the police mail sting. In January of 2004, Athen's case finally gets before a jury. 12 days later, the jury delivers its verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of the crime of murder in the second degree.
John Athen draws 10 to 20 years in prison. For Kristen's family, it seems hardly enough.
This person here really ruined a lot of people's lives. We're tired of being scared, and what he did was it's unspeakable. He's ruined my whole family.
These days, John Athen is not a happy man. For cold case detectives, however, the verdict goes up as a win on a scoreboard, which hangs in their office.
We've sent 42 cases to the State Crime Lab. They've returned 35 cases to us. Of those 35, they have profiles of an offender in 25 out of 35. That's a 72% patent average.
That should be coming out.
Well, it's supposed to be a retrial.
With hopes that the winning streak continues, cold case detectives return to the vault, where hundreds of unsolved cases line the shelves. Hundreds of victims like Kristen Sumstad, waiting for someone to open their file and give it a second chance.
Deep in the Mojave Desert, Route 14 rambles south into the one stoplight town of Rosamond, California. Here, every face is familiar, and everyone knows Tana Woolly, a 20-year-old beauty queen, a student, and quintessential girl next door. On a Wednesday morning, Tana's mother Helen takes a call about her daughter.
It was between, I think, 9:30 and 10, and her boss, Patty April, called me and said that Tana had not come to work.
Helen gets into her car and heads over to Tana's apartment.
When I pulled up, her car was there. I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was her, and I didn't go any further.
Tana Woolly's body hangs over the side of her bed. She is naked from the waist down, has one blue sock on her foot and the other wrapped around her neck. Detectives bag the victim's clothes and bedding and send the body to the local morgue. There, the cause of death is officially determined to be strangulation. Semen is recovered, confirming initial suspicions of a sexual assault. In 1978, however, nothing further can be done with the forensic evidence. Days slip by, and the small town of Rosamond speculates about who might want Tana Woolly dead. Meanwhile, a family buries their daughter and waits for an answer. Two weeks after their daughter's murder, the Woolly family believes the investigation has already gone sideways. Kern County detectives are stretched thin, and leads are as dry as the desert air. Help comes in the form of a private eye named Lou McNatt, who promises the Woolly family he will take a second look at their daughter's murder. McNatt starts with a visit to Tana Woolly's apartment complex. Several residents finger one person in particular, a neighbor named Larry Hazlitt. The 31-year-old is known in the complex as the local creep. Even better for McNatt, Larry Hazlitt lives in apartment number 5, just 10 feet away from Tana Woolly's bedroom window.
His front door faced the other way from her apartment, but the window was right there. It was a big window, so he could sit there and watch by the hour.
McNatt's theory gained some traction when Tana's boyfriend, Ricky Rush, discloses that Tana had expressed some concerns about the man in apartment number 5.
She had mentioned to Rick, that this guy would be staring at her, and she felt kind of uneasy.
The pieces are beginning to fit. A theory of murder sharpening into focus. It is a theory that begins at home with a young woman and ends with her neighbor just a few doors away. 5 months after Tana Woolly's death, Larry Hazlitt slips quietly out of town, out of the reach of police, and out of the reach of Lou McNatt. The private investigator feels he has identified Tana Woolly's killer, but is powerless to do anything about it. In time, the investigation into Tana Woolly's murder finds its way into the cold files, her death forgotten by all, save a precious few.
The problem that we had is there was a turnover of detectives on this case. So each new detective that was given the case would have to start off from square one.
In 1999, the torch is passed to a new generation, and Tana's sister Taryn begins to call police. Like her parents, Taryn is polite but insistent that detectives take up Tana's case and begin to work it again. For 3 months, Taryn calls, until finally she gets a sergeant named Chris Spear on the other end of the line. The investigator promises to take a look into Tana's file. Among the pieces of evidence is a request for fingerprints from a man named Larry Hazlitt. The same Larry Hazlitt developed as a suspect by the Woolly family's private investigator 20 years earlier. Speer is not sure why the original investigators wanted Hazlitt's prints and decides to run a background check. What he gets back is a 20-year rap sheet, including 4 arrests for rape.
I think that was when the light bulb came on, the eureka moment. This is my guy.
Hazlitt is a registered sex offender living in Sacramento. Speer pulls his address and heads into the city for a sit-down with his suspect. Larry Hazlitt lives a quiet life on a quiet street. His neighbors never suspecting Hazlitt is also a convicted sex offender. On October 5th, Sergeant Speer knocks on Hazlitt's front door, armed with a search warrant for his DNA.
He voluntarily surrendered the samples and just said, here you go, didn't know her, be glad to help you in the future, goodbye.
Spears can only assume one of 2 things. Either Larry Hazlitt is entirely innocent, or he has gotten away with so much crime in his life that he thinks he cannot be caught. In 2000, DNA analyst Brenda Smith sifts through evidence more than 20 years old. Using an alternate light source, Smith scans the items for stains that might indicate bodily fluids.
I found some small circular stains, kind of yellowish looking stains towards the top of the bedspread. I did screen portions of a couple of those areas, and they did screen positive for semen.
Smith isolates the stains, extracts a genetic profile, and compares it to the DNA signature of Larry Hazlitt.
It ended up matching Hazlitt. I've never been more excited probably on any of the other cases that I've looked at in the time that I've been doing DNA. I think I almost hyperventilated on that one.
The match is as good as it gets, with an occurrence frequency of 1 in 126 billion. Smith puts a call into Kern County Homicide. The Tana Woolly case is in play, with a suspect waiting to be arrested. Detectives Joe Hicks and Scott Jeladich are given the job of arresting and interrogating Larry Hazlitt. Despite the DNA match, the two quickly realize the case against Hazlitt is far from certain.
We were concerned that a defense of his could be his claim that it was consensual.
And you absolutely, in looking at this female, can tell me, have you ever had sexual relations with this female? Of any type?
No, sir.
Oral copulation, intercourse?
No.
Would it change your story if I told you that in the original crime scene from the Kern County District Attorney's Crime Lab, that they found biological evidence of you being present in what you see?
That's a damn lie.
Is it a lie?
It's a damn lie.
Hazlitt claims the DNA evidence against him is a plant. An arrest warrant is issued, and a date set for trial. Ed Jagels has been prosecuting cases for almost 3 decades. In December of 2002, he picks up the Hazlitt case and immediately identifies a problem. In preparing for trial, he has paid a visit to the Kern County Forensic Lab to talk about a young girl's blue sock.
Because it was a ligature, it would have had to have been held pretty tightly and for a little bit of a lengthy time. There was at least a potential that some skin cells from the individual's hands could have sloughed off onto the sock.
Using a single-edge razor, Smith scrapes the topmost layer of material off Tana Woolly's sock. The partial profile is consistent with Larry Hazlitt. Not a full genetic match, but enough to undermine any contention that Hazlitt's DNA, also found on the victim's bedsheet, was the result of a consensual sexual relationship. After a week of testimony and an hour and a half of deliberation, the panel returns a verdict. Larry Hazlitt is found guilty of murder. A month later, he is sentenced.
We hereby determine that the penalty shall be death. Yes.
Helen Woolly watches as the man who raped and killed her daughter is taken away to await his own death by lethal injection.
I just wanted to tell him what he robbed me of. And I knew down deep in my heart that justice would prevail.